Picture this, a quiet suburban home where a father and daughter reunite after years apart, their smiles masking a secret so dark it could shatter a family and a nation. Now imagine that secret spiraling into a love so forbidden it defies every law of nature, only to end in a blood-soaked rampage that leaves for dead and a community in stunned silence. This isn't just a crime story, it's a plunge into a twisted abyss where trust turns to terror and every step reveals a new layer of horror. Buckle up, because what you're about to hear will haunt you long after the screen goes dark. Stay with us as we peel back the layers of a true crime nightmare that began with a single, innocent click. In the pre-internet haze of 1995, a time when online connections were still a novelty, a man named Stephen Plattle, then just 20 years old, stumbled into a chatroom that would alter the course of his life and others. Forever there, he met Alyssa Garcia, a 15-year-old girl from a troubled home, drawn to the anonymity of the digital world. Their conversations quickly turned personal, a spark igniting across the screen that neither could resist. By January 1998, Alyssa, now 18, gave birth to their daughter, Denise, in a small Virginia town where whispers of scandal were already brewing. But Stephen wasn't the doting father he pretended to be. Behind closed doors, his temper flared. Court documents later unearthed chilling details. He pinched the infant Denise until her skin bruised, once even placing her in a cooler to muffle her cries when she wouldn't stop. Alyssa, overwhelmed and fearing for her child's safety, made an agonizing choice. At 8 months old, Denise was surrendered for adoption to Anthony and Kelly Fusco, a compassionate couple in Dover, New York, who renamed her Katie Rose and promised her a fresh start. For the next 18 years, Katie grew up in the rolling hills of Dover, a picturesque town where life moved at a gentle pace. She was an artistic soul, sketching landscapes and dreaming of art school, unaware of the shadows cast by her biological origins. The Fuscos shielded her from the truth, raising her as their own with love and stability. Meanwhile, Stephen and Alyssa's relationship deteriorated, their early passion giving way to arguments and resentment. Stephen's controlling nature dominated their home, but he remained a phantom in Katie's life until technology brought them back together. In August 2016, at 18, Katie, curious about her roots, typed a Facebook message to the man listed as her biological father. Stephen responded almost instantly, his words warm and inviting, painting himself as a father eager to reconnect. What began as a cautious exchange soon deepened. Encouraged by Stephen, Katie decided to visit, arriving in Henrico County, Virginia. With a suitcase and a heart full of hope, Stephen greeted her with a smile that hid his true intentions, welcoming her into a house where Alyssa's presence was already fading. Neighbors later recalled seeing the young woman, noting her resemblance to Stephen, but no one suspected the darkness lurking beneath this father-daughter reunion. As weeks turned 2 months, Katie settled in, her presence shifting the dynamics of the household in ways no one could yet comprehend. The stage was set, and the seeds of a tragedy were beginning to take root. ****, by the time Katie stepped into Stephen Plattle's Henrico County home in August 2016, the marriage between Stephen and Alyssa was a crumbling facade. What had once been a volatile but passionate union had eroded into a daily war of words and silent resentment. Stephen's temper was a constant storm, yelling matches that echoed through the walls, accusations that left Alyssa isolated, and a controlling grip that dictated her every move. Neighbors whispered about the tension, but no one intervened. Alyssa, worn down by years of emotional abuse, clung to the hope of stability for their younger daughter, but that hope was slipping away. When Katie arrived, Stephen's demeanor shifted. He began to change, dyeing his graying hair a darker shade, swapping his casual clothes for sharper outfits, and lingering around Katie with an intensity that unsettled Alyssa. At first, she dismissed it as overprotectiveness, a father adjusting to his long-lost daughter, but the signs grew impossible to ignore. Stephen started sleeping in Katie's room, claiming it was to help her settle in, his excuses growing flimsier with each passing night. Alyssa confronted him, her voice trembling with suspicion, but Stephen brushed her off with cold indifference. The turning point came in late 2016. Alyssa's unease turned to dread as she noticed stolen glances, hushed conversations, and a closeness that transcended any normal father-daughter bond. By November, the weight of it all became unbearable. Alyssa packed a bag, took her younger daughter, and fled the house, leaving Katie behind in Stephen's care. She didn't know it then, but her departure opened the door to a nightmare. Alone with Katie, Stephen's manipulation deepened. He preyed on her vulnerability, her search for identity, her gratitude for his acceptance, twisting it into something sinister. What started as emotional dependency soon crossed into forbidden territory. By late 2016, Stephen and Katie had entered an incestuous relationship, a secret forged in the shadows of that Virginia home. They hid it well, their interactions masked as familial affection to the outside world, but the truth simmered beneath. Alyssa, now living apart, sensed something was wrong but couldn't yet piece it together. The bond between Stephen and Katie was no longer just a reunion, it was a descent into a taboo so profound it would soon shatter their lives. By mid-2017, the clandestine relationship between Stephen Plattell and Katie had reached a point of no return. What began as a twisted reunion had morphed into a full-fledged partnership, one they were determined to legitimize despite the biological taboo at its core. In July 2017, under a veil of deception, they traveled to Maryland, a state with less stringent marriage laws. There, they stood before a justice of the peace, falsifying their identities and omitting their father-daughter connection. Stephen, with his commanding presence, and Katie, caught in a web of manipulation and her own confusion, exchanged vows that were legally binding but morally unthinkable. To the clerk processing their paperwork, they were just another couple starting a life together. To the world they hid from, they were crossing a line that would soon ignite a firestorm. Back in Virginia, they settled into a semblance of domesticity, their secret marriage a fragile shield against the truth. Months later, in September 2017, their union bore fruit with the birth of a son, Bennett. The arrival of the baby should have been a moment of joy, but it was tainted by the circumstances of his conception. Stephen reveled in his new role as a father again, while Katie, now 19, navigated the complexities of motherhood under his domineering influence. They presented themselves to a select few as an unconventional family, their story carefully curated to avoid scrutiny. But the cracks were widening. Alyssa, living separately with her younger daughter, grew increasingly suspicious. One day, while helping her 11-year-old with homework, she stumbled upon a journal entry that stopped her cold. The child's innocent scribbles detailed overheard conversations, Stephen's late-night visits to Katie, the baby's arrival, and a phrase that hinted at something far darker. "Daddy loves Katie like a wife." The revelation hit Alyssa like a punch to the gut. She confronted her daughter, who tearfully confirmed the unthinkable. Armed with this evidence, Alyssa took the journal to the authorities, setting off a chain reaction that would expose Stephen and Katie's secret to the world. The marriage, the child, the lies, all of it was about to crumble under the weight of a truth too grotesque to ignore. The explosive revelation from Alyssa's daughter's journal in January 2018 set the wheels of justice in motion, shattering the fragile illusions Stephen and Katie had built. Virginia authorities, armed with the damning evidence, swooped in with a warrant, arresting Stephen Plattell and Katie at their Henrico County home. The charges were as severe as the crime: incest, a felony that carried the weight of societal outrage and legal consequence. The courtroom buzzed with tension as the case unfolded, with Alyssa testifying through tears about the abuse she'd endured and the journal's chilling revelations. Katie, now 20, sat silently, her face a mask of confusion and fear, her youthful dreams of art school replaced by the cold reality of a defendant's bench. The prosecution painted Stephen as a predator, highlighting his history of violence toward Denise as an infant and his manipulative control over Katie. Evidence mounted text messages, witness statements from neighbors who'd noticed odd behavior, and the marriage certificate that told a lie in black and white. The judge, a stern figure with decades on the bench, listened intently as the defense attempted to argue mitigating circumstances, hinting at a controversial theory of genetic sexual attraction to explain the bond, but the court was unmoved. On January 15, 2018, a no-contact order was issued, a legal barrier meant to sever Stephen and Katie's connection. Katie was returned to her adoptive parents, Anthony and Kelly Fusco, in Dover, New York, where they struggled to process the daughter they'd raised, now entangled in such a scandal. Baby Bennett, the innocent byproduct of this forbidden union, was placed in the custody of Stephen's mother in North Carolina, a decision that left her torn between familial duty and disgust. Stephen, however, was released on bond, a decision that would later spark widespread debate. Despite his documented history of abuse and the gravity of the charges, the judge cited a lack of immediate evidence of flight risk, a ruling that overlooked the volatility simmering in Stephen's eyes. As he walked free, his rage festered, fueled by the loss of Katie and his son. He began plotting, his mind a cauldron of resentment and desperation. The system had intervened, but it had also handed him a dangerous opportunity to reclaim what he believed was his. Whispers among legal experts emerged, questioning how a man with such a profile could be granted freedom, a foreshadowing of the tragedy to come. Meanwhile, Katie, back with the Fuscos, grappled with her identity, torn between the life she'd known and the one Stephen had forced upon her, unaware that her time was running out. The no-contact order and the loss of his family gnawed at Stephen Plattle like an open wound, festering through the cold months of early 2018. Confined to his Virginia home, he spiraled into a vortex of rage and obsession, each day without Katie. And Bennett felt like a personal betrayal, a punishment he refused to accept. He spent hours pacing, his mind replaying their time together, the secret marriage, the birth of his son, the life he'd crafted against all odds. Letters he wrote, but never sent, piled up, filled with declarations of love and threats against those who'd torn them apart. His mother, caring for Bennett in North Carolina, noticed his increasingly erratic phone calls, his voice trembling with a mix of pleading and menace. She tried to reason with him, urging him to seek help, but Stephen's grip on reality was slipping. The bond decision that had set him free now became his weapon, a legal loophole he exploited with chilling intent. On April 11, 2018, at 9:47 a.m., Stephen made his move. He drove to his mother's home in Knightdale, North Carolina, his demeanor eerily calm, with a fabricated story about wanting Bennett to see Katie under supervised conditions. He convinced his mother to hand over the 7-month-old. She hesitated, her maternal instincts warning her of danger, but Stephen's insistence and the weight of their shared blood swayed her. Alone with Bennett in the car, he drove to a secluded spot near a quiet park, the baby's coos filling the silence. What happened next was a calculated act of horror. Stephen, his hands trembling but resolute, smothered Bennett with a blanket, his breaths growing shallow until they stopped. The infant's lifeless body lay in the backseat, a silent testament to Stephen's unraveling mind. He sat there for hours, staring at the child he'd both created and destroyed, tears streaming down his face as he muttered apologies to a son who could no longer hear. This wasn't an impulsive act, it was the first strike in a plan he'd been nursing since his release, a way to erase the evidence of his failure and strike back at those who'd taken Katie away. As dusk fell, he wrapped Bennett in a jacket, leaving the scene with a cold determination, his next destination already locked in his mind. The murder of his own son was a line crossed, a point of no return that set the stage for the bloodshed to follow, leaving the audience to wonder how far his desperation would drive him next. With Bennett's lifeless body still haunting the Backseat of his minivan, Stephen Plattle's mind was a furnace of fury and despair as he drove north from Knightdale, North Carolina. On the morning of April 12, 2018, the AR-15 style rifle he'd stashed in the vehicle, a weapon he'd purchased months earlier, lay within reach, its cold steel a promise of the vengeance he craved. His destination was New Milford, Connecticut, where Katie had returned to her adoptive parents, Anthony and Kelly Fusco, under the court's no-contact order. The 600-mile journey was a blur of sleepless determination, fueled by a cocktail of grief, rage, and a warped sense of ownership over Katie. He stopped only to refuel, his eyes bloodshot and his hands gripping the wheel as if it were the last threat of control in his life. In his mind, the Fuscos were the enemy, the ones who'd stolen his wife and son, and he was prepared to reclaim what he believed was his at any cost. At 2:17 p.m., Stephen arrived in New Milford, a sleepy town, where the Fuscos lived in a modest home surrounded by maple trees. Katie and Anthony were in the driveway, loading a pickup truck with supplies for a weekend project, unaware of the shadow creeping closer. Kelly was inside, preparing lunch, when the first shots rang out. Stephen, parking a block away, approached. With the rifle raised, his footsteps silent on the gravel. Without a word, he opened fire, the crack of gunfire shattering the afternoon calm. The first bullet struck Anthony in the chest, dropping the 56-year-old to his knees as he gasped for air, his eyes wide with shock. Katie screamed, turning to run, but a second shot hit her in the back, sending her sprawling onto the pavement. Stephen fired again, ensuring neither survived, his face a mask of cold resolve. Neighbors rushed to windows, dialing 911 as the echoes faded, but Stephen was already moving. He fled the scene, leaving behind a truck stained with blood and a community plunged into chaos. Kelly emerged to find her husband and daughter lifeless, her cries piercing the air as police sirens wailed in the distance. The double homicide sent shockwaves through New Milford, where violent crime was a rarity. Witnesses described a man in a dark hoodie, his movements deliberate, disappearing into his van. News crews descended, helicopters circling as authorities issued an APB for Stephen's vehicle. Meanwhile, he drove north toward Dover, New York, where Katie had grown up, his mind fixated on a final act. The murder of Anthony and Katie wasn't just revenge, it was a statement, a refusal to let go of the life he'd built. Each mile brought him closer to his endgame, the rifle still warm from its deadly work and the weight of his actions beginning to press down. The nation held its breath, unaware that this spree was far from over, leaving viewers to brace for the next devastating turn. ***, with the blood of Katie and Anthony Fusco still fresh on his hands, Stephen Plattle drove north from New Milford, Connecticut, his minivan a rolling crypt carrying Bennett's body in the backseat. The date was April 12, 2018, and the time neared 4 p.m. as he crossed into Dover, New York, the town where Katie had been raised by the Fuscos. The irony wasn't lost on him. This was the place where his twisted dream had been born, and now it would be its graveyard. His mind raced, a chaotic symphony of guilt, defiance, and a desperate need to escape the consequences of his actions. The AR-15 style rifle rested beside him, its magazine nearly depleted but still loaded with one final round. He parked near a wooded area off a quiet road, the same streets where Katie had once walked to school, oblivious to her biological father's existence. Inside the van, the air grew thick with the stench of death and his own sweat. Stephen sat for nearly an hour, staring at a photo of Katie he kept in his wallet, tears streaming down his face as he muttered fragmented apologies and justifications to avoid that couldn't respond. At 4:50 p.m., his mother's phone rang in North Carolina. Stephen's voice, shaky but resolute, confessed the unimaginable. He'd killed Bennett, Katie, and Anthony, and he wasn't done. He spoke of love twisted into rage, of a world that wouldn't let him keep what was his. Terrified, she begged him to stop, to turn himself in, but the line went dead. She immediately dialed 911, her voice breaking as she relayed his words to a dispatcher who struggled to process the horror. Meanwhile, Stephen made his last decision. With the rifle in hand, he pressed the barrel to his temple, his finger trembling. On the trigger, at 5:03 p.m., a single gunshot echoed through the van, ending his life in a spray of blood that splattered the windows. His body slumped over the steering wheel, the weapon falling to the floor, the silence deafening. Police converged on the scene within minutes, guided by his mother's call and the earlier reports from New Milford. They found Stephen dead, Bennett's tiny form wrapped in a jacket, and the Vanna Macabre tableau of his final act. Simultaneously, investigators in Knightdale, North Carolina, and New Milford, Connecticut, pieced together the timeline: Bennett's murder, the double homicide, and now this suicide. The discovery sent shockwaves through law enforcement, who realized they'd been chasing a man already beyond their reach. News helicopters buzzed overhead as the story broke nationally, the Plattle name becoming synonymous with a tragedy that defied comprehension. In Dover, residents gathered in stunned silence, candles flickering at a makeshift memorial for Katie and Anthony. Stephen's mother, overwhelmed by grief and guilt, faced questions from detectives about why she'd let Bennett go with him, her answers drowned in tears. The Fusco home in New Milford became a crime scene, Kelly Fusco's wails echoing as she identified her husband and daughter, her world shattered. The case left a void for lives extinguished, a family destroyed, and a community grappling with how such evil could emerge from their midst. As the sun set on April 12, 2018, the nation mourned, unaware that the full extent of Stephen's descent would fuel debates and nightmares for years to come. Would fuel debates and nightmares for years to come. The aftermath of Stephen Plattle's rampage on April 12, 2018, left a landscape of shattered lives and unanswered questions that lingered long into the years that followed. In Henrico County, Virginia, Alyssa Plattle grappled with a storm of guilt and grief, her escape from Stephen's abuse now tainted by the knowledge that she'd left Katie behind. The journal that had exposed the incestuous relationship became a haunting relic, its pages a testament to her failure to protect her daughter. She faced public scrutiny, with some blaming her for not acting sooner while others saw her as a victim of Stephen's manipulation. In Dover, New York, the Fusco family was plunged into a void. Kelly Fusco, widowed and childless in an instant, struggled to find meaning amid the loss of Anthony and Katie. Their home, once a sanctuary, stood as a silent crime scene, its walls echoing with memories of a daughter who'd been stolen twice, first by adoption, then by death. The community rallied, holding vigils where candles flickered against the night, but the pain was a wound that refused to heal. In North Carolina, Stephen's mother bore the heaviest burden, her decision to let Bennett go with him replaying in her mind like a nightmare. She cooperated with investigators, her statements painting a picture of a son who'd spiraled beyond reach, but the guilt gnawed at her soul. Legal experts and child welfare advocates descended on the case, dissecting the bond decision that had freed Stephen despite his history. Reports emerged of missed red flags, his abusive past with Denise, the erratic behavior noted by neighbors, sparking outrage and calls for reform in the judicial system. Online forums buzzed with theories, some pointing to genetic sexual attraction as a factor in Stephen and Katie's bond, though psychologists countered that his grooming and control were the true drivers. The debate raged, but no explanation could undo the tragedy. In 2024, Lifetime released Husband, Father, Killer: The Alyssa Plattle Story, a dramatization that reignited public interest, with Alyssa's portrayal drawing both sympathy and criticism, further fueling the narrative's cultural footprint. As of June 11, 2025, the Plattle case remains a cautionary tale etched in true crime lore. The Fusco family has retreated from the public eye, their silence a shield against the world's judgment. Alyssa, too, has faded into obscurity, her last known statements expressing a desire for privacy and healing. The legal system, while quieter on reforms, saw minor changes in bond evaluation protocols, though advocates argue it's not enough. This story isn't just about murder, it's about a love so distorted it consumed everything in its path, leaving behind a legacy of loss and a mirror to society's failures. Stephen Plattle's actions destroyed for lives Bennett, Katie, Anthony, and himself while scarring countless others. It's a reminder of how quickly trust can turn to terror, how the shadows of the past can shape a future no one can escape. If this tale gripped you, share it with others, but never forget the human cost. Subscribe for more journeys into the darkest corners of the human soul, where every story leaves a mark.